All right. Good morning, Buckeyes. Let's go ahead and get started. I hope you guys are doing well. It's been a good week so far with being virtually online and with classes. What we're going to do is we're going to start off by actually finishing Module 38. So there's a little bit that we didn't quite get a chance to cover. So I'll make sure we do that and do that well. And then we'll start turning into our last two topics, which will be talking about conditioning. So classical and operant conditioning. So before we do that, though, I want to make sure that we have everyone on the same page with a couple of quick announcements. So first off, it was great to have you guys in class on Tuesday. I really super appreciate that. I see you guys are back again today. That's really, really outstanding. I appreciate you guys making that adjustment. I think being successful with classes online is making sure that you're here and attending as best that you can. Today is definitely one of those days that I want to make sure that you jump in on answering questions. It's a class that really only works best if I hear back from you, if I get answers, things like that. We'll try to break into smaller groups a little bit too today. We'll see how that works. So please make sure you're jumping in, answering questions. Again, you can do it over chat if you'd like, but please go ahead and just do it through audio. If you do have a video option right now, go ahead and please join video-wise if you're able to and you feel comfortable with that. It's nice to see the faces as I'm going on and lecturing. It's helpful to kind of see what you guys are focused on and things like that as well. So jump in with that. A couple of important announcements going forward. On Tuesday before class, submitted through Carmen, there's 2 assignments that are due. Just like usual, module outline assignment is going to be due before class. So this is something we've normally been doing now. We'll continue even in our virtual class. So you'll be turning in outline module for number 18. So you're outline module 18 in this case. Again, a little more practice with that module. So please make sure that you're giving yourself some time to do that. Thinking about the feedback that I gave you guys before on previous module outlines. I want to see you guys do a nice job with that, even though it's been some time since we turned one in. The other piece to make sure that you're turning in on Tuesday that is different for us is quiz number 4. So because we're not able to be in class together like normal and I can't give quizzes there, we're going to do quizzes online. So you'll see it's already posted. Basically, you'll see it's going to be reinforcing some of the things we've been talking about. And we'll talk about especially today. So make sure that you get that completed before Tuesday, before class starts. If you have any questions as you're doing that, let me know. You'll submit it to Dropbox just like you do with the module outline assignment. So hopefully you find it to be pretty straightforward, a good replacement for our quiz, and good practice for you. So as I always do, kind of let me pause at this point to see what questions you guys have. Again, see if you can kind of log in with some of the video cameras, check in with me that way. But let me again pause at this point to see if you have any questions, things in general I can help with before we jump back into content. All right, guys. It seems like we're good. Seems like we're set. So let's go ahead. A little bit of this will be reviewing where we left off on Tuesday, but then jumping into talking about new information related to kind of the most pro-social behavior, which is being in a relationship. And to understand how relationships develop, we have to first think about factors that make 2 people attracted, wanting to be together. And we talked about these as really the first being psychological factors that bring people together, which is proximity, exposure, familiarity, attractiveness. So one of the things that's very unique for us right now is that we don't have the physical proximity to each other anymore because of our social distancing. So instead, the only proximity we have is kind of these virtual connections. And we see that even in online dating, in situations like this where we're at least interacting online together in a group, we're able to still have some kind of proximity. But in terms of psychological factors bringing people together, it's now kind of minimized to some degree. The more you're introducing yourself to someone else, the more they see you, the more familiar you are with them, more likely it also is to increase that attraction, increasing wanting to get people to be together. And lastly, as we talked about before, the more you find someone to be attractive, the more likely you are to want to be with that person, to date them, to have a long-term relationship with them potentially. And we see that attractiveness is actually the #1 predicting factor, even when there are other factors that should be kind of more relevant, such as having similar ideologies, similar beliefs, similar common background. And what we see when we get done with this kind of initial first stage is this starts to develop into a passionate love, which we'll define and focus on a bit more today, and more than a long-term compassionate love. So we'll talk about what compassionate love looks like and the important pieces of it. Okay, so let's first just quickly review the psychological factors we talked about in terms of starting a relationship. Okay, so kind of the beginning pieces here. In this case, we're talking about proximity and exposure, and we specifically were talking about this mere exposure effect. Okay, this idea that more we see someone's face, the more it starts to make them more likable. Okay, so by seeing something more and more often, the more you find that you like it, the more you're going to develop an attraction to it. Okay, so the more you're seeing that person in your classroom sitting next to you, the more you're interacting with that customer that comes in, just merely seeing that person starts to make them more likable, which then increases the likelihood that you're going to become attracted to that person. Okay? And we have an example of this where we did some researchers did face morphing. They took the voter's face, the participant's face in this case, morphed it then with George Bush, one of the political candidates. And what they found is that voters preferred a candidate whose pictures incorporated the voters' features. And the reason why this happens is because that mere exposure. Individuals are used to seeing themselves. The more they see themselves in someone else, in this case, that 60-40 blend, the more that they're going to see that person as being familiar and trustworthy, therefore more likely to vote for them. Okay, so kind of that's one of the characteristics we see when we vote for political candidates is that you feel that they're trustworthy and you see as being kind of safe. And so when you start to tie in elements of yourself, in this case, your perception, your actual physical appearance, the more then you're familiar with that person, more likely you are to then vote for them. So that takes us where we left off in terms of talking about things on Tuesday. What we're going to start getting into is the last little bit here, talking about this passionate and companionate love and how to be successful with both of these and what they are. So with passionate love, we talk about this as a strong state of attraction, interest, excitement, felt so strongly that people are really absorbed in each other. Okay, so a state of strong attraction, interest, excitement. Suddenly you see people kind of being totally absorbed in each other. And we see this kind of happening all the time. I'm sure you guys have had those friends that are, you're pretty close with. Suddenly they start dating someone else, and then you don't hear from them ever again. Suddenly they're all in on that other person. They're focused on that romantic partner. They have such strong attractions to them. They always want to be around that person. They start to almost become kind of that one person. And that's really kind of a demonstration of what happens when this passionate love develops. And we can characterize the components of passionate love with having several different aspects. The first with this passionate love is there's a physiological arousal. So something where you start sweating, your heart starts pounding, you're anxious, you're kind of jittery. Those kind of nervous first date jitters that you have, or nervousness when you're starting to meet someone, it's a fun and exciting time as the relationship starts. But it's also partly driven by this kind of physiological arousal that you're having by being around that other person, that passionate love component, where it has that strong physiological arousal. We also see, too, related to this passionate love stage, that there's a flattering appraisal of each other. And what I mean here is that you start to view the other person in a very positive way. So if they do something, you think it's really the best thing ever. If something happens where a bad thing happens, maybe your date's late, maybe they're a little bit rude or something like that, you still kind of make an appraisal, you make an attribution for their behavior in a way that still seems kind of positive. Okay, so, maybe they're a little bit late, but they were just so busy at work, or they were, really trying to do the best they can. They got here as close as they could, instead of thinking negative about them. So we start to see the romantic partner in that passionate love with kind of these rosy colored glasses, where everything's kind of perfect about them. And I think the last key piece, and maybe this is one that you'd identify the most with passionate love, is there's this intense desire to be around that person. Okay, you want to be in that other person's presence. That's where you might find yourself text messaging that person all the time. In this case, being separated, you might be calling them, video conferencing with them. You want to be around that person as much as possible. And that's where you start to see, again, new relationships as they develop, as they start to become kind of more formalized. You start to see your friend just kind of disappear on you because they're just wanting to be around their romantic partner, and they kind of ditch you, which is, again, a function of that relationship. So we see with our passionate love, it's a strong absorption into that other person, this strong desire to be connected to them. Now, this passionate love will last for quite some time, but what it eventually translates into in terms of longer relationships is what we call companionate love or compassionate love. Okay, kind of think about it both ways. And this compassion or this companionate love is a deep, caring, affectionate attachment, a commitment to the other person. So again, it's a deep, caring, affectionate attachment, commitment to this other person. You really are concerned about their well-being. The depth of the relationship is much stronger, so you really think about the other person, think about their needs, coordinate your activities with them, think about long-term things rather than just wanting to be around each other. You really do stay much more connected to this person at a much deeper level. And specifically, we start to see this is in terms of commitment and attachment. So commitment is a plan where you start to decide you're going to stay together, even when that passionate feeling of attraction starts to go away. Okay, so in long-term relationships, when you see your partner, you don't feel this physiological arousal. Okay, when you've been married for quite some time, it's not an experience that you have. There's maybe not always that intense desire to be around someone, but you become more committed to that person in terms of making sure that they're successful, that you have a good, strong relationship, that it's built on good fundamental principles. That's what that compassionate love starts to look more like. We also do see, though, that instead of intense desire to be with others, you still feel kind of like your lives are more intertwined. So attachment is now more than just desire to be together, but you start to be connected where if something happens to one of you, the other person really feels that effect. Or you might start sharing resources, or you're making plans together. Maybe you're moving in together, where you're starting to see your lives become more and more connected to each other. So rather than just wanting to be physically around each other, in this case, you kind of want to more have that long-term commitment where you're starting to intertwine kind of larger aspects of yourself. So this is not to say that in that compassionate love, that deep long-term love, that you still don't have that excitement around the other person, things like that. It doesn't necessarily entirely go away, but it's not the driving factor of compassionate love as much as that physiological arousal is that driving factor in that passionate love. And that's where you always kind of experience those jitters around someone new. You see this being played up in kind of TV shows and movies all the time. So the last slide I want to cover here kind of expands a little bit on this compassionate love. And these are suggestions, kind of keys for having long-term relationships. So how do you move out of this passionate love stage to then be successful in this compassionate love stage? And so we see the first of these, okay, is equity in a relationship. And so equity in a relationship can be both giving and receiving, sharing responsibilities, and having a sense of partnership in the relationship. Okay, so idea is that you're both giving and receiving. Okay, so you're both getting benefits from that relationship. You're then giving benefits to the relationship. So you're helping support your partner. Your partner is also then supporting you. So it becomes kind of very intertwined in that sense. You share responsibilities in terms of financial commitments, raising kids, doing things that you need to in order to both be successful as a couple. So that responsibility starts to become jointly shared. In new relationships, it's more about that passionate feelings where you're not really thinking about responsibilities, things that you have to do. And I think the last piece goes towards this sense of partnership, that you're doing things together. So as you guys know, thinking way back when we did the music extra credit, one of the song that I played was You and Me by Dave Matthews. And part of the reason I also like that song, and part of the reason we chose it for our wedding song, is it also talks about a sense of partnership. So the two of us together, we can do anything. We're going to raise our kids together. That this is a joint life that we're going to have together. And that's where that partnership ends up coming out, and that kind of this idea of equity. So a long-term relationship will have both partners giving and receiving, sharing responsibilities, having a sense of partnership. If one partner is always kind of taking from the other, not being responsible, not really seeing this as a joint group, then what we see is that that's not going to be a successful relationship, that's going to be one that might potentially fall apart. Now, another piece that we have here is self-disclosure. And we talked a little bit about this as we kind of start to develop new relationships. But we see too that self-disclosure is kind of sharing information about yourself. And then when we start relationships, we don't want to share too much all at once. Okay, we don't want that TMI to happen that we've talked about before. But even in these long-term relationships, you want to share more and more about yourself. Okay, you want to increase that intimacy, sharing more of kind of your thoughts, sharing more of your emotions. Maybe we're getting frustrated or really happy about things. You want to share that information with your partner so they have a better understanding of you, so they can relate to that experience. So that self-disclosure never goes away. It might be most intense in that passionate stage where you're starting to learn about someone else. But in this long, love-lasting relationship, you want that self-disclosure. You want to increase that intimacy by sharing more and more of who you are. And the last piece that I'll share in terms of successful, long-lasting relationships is positive interactions and support. And while this could be kind of perceived as something really kind of simple and straightforward, it is hugely important to long-term relationships. And the reason why is it's important to offer sympathy, concern, those laughs, those hugs. These are ways that we connect to the other person. Okay, in this case, hugs physically, but offering sympathy, understanding their perspective, being concerned about things that are going on. Those laughter is a way that we connect with others. It's really important. And in fact, one of the most interesting specific findings that I've ever found out of social psychology relates to this aspect. And Erving Goffman's research shows that for every one negative thing you do in a relationship, to offset that one negative thing, you need to do 5 positive things. Okay, so within psychology, within social psychology, we don't always get that specific about ratios and things like that. But in this case, they were able to be a little more specific. And you can imagine that one negative thing you do, like, making fun of someone, saying that, your partner didn't do a very good job making dinner, in order to make that person feel better and to make sure that your relationship is balanced again, you then need to do 5 positive things, like give them a hug, laugh with them together, compliment them, kind of build them up, support them with something. So it's really important then, with that ratio in mind, to keep in mind how much one negative thing can really be harmful to a relationship, and how, especially in that long-term relationship, those negative things continue to build up. That can be hugely problematic. You start to see less commitment in a relationship. So we reviewed the first little part about kind of how relationships form. We talked about that passionate love stage going into that compassionate love stage. Now we talked about kind of the long-lasting aspects of relationships. Let me pause at this point to see what questions you have, things that you want me to go back over before we'll change gears and get into our big topic for today, talking about classical conditioning. So I'll kind of hold off here. You can go ahead and jump in either on chat, or if you just want to share your question, you can do that as well. So I'll give us just a second here. All right. Okay, so it's seeming like we're okay. I'm not getting any response, so I'll take that as a good thing for now. Okay. So go ahead and give me just 1 minute. I'm going to transition this over into talking about our next section, which will be talking about classical conditioning.